You know, words can feel so permanent, can't they? But they're really not. They live, they breathe, and sometimes they go on a journey that's so dramatic it can actually reflect centuries of social change. Today we're going to trace the incredible semantic evolution of just one single word, gay.
Okay, let's start with this. When Chaucer wrote this line, way back in the 14th century, its meaning was crystal clear. He was asking, quite simply, why is my neighbor's wife so cheerful and merry? There was absolutely no ambiguity, no hidden meaning at all. It was just a straightforward question about happiness.
But imagine asking that exact same question today. It would mean something completely different, right? That huge shift from cheerful to a primary way of describing homosexual identity is one of the most fascinating stories in the English language. So how on earth did we get from there to here? Well, the word's journey can really be broken down into 4 distinct acts. First, you have its centuries-long life as a simple word for joy. Then a shadow starts to creep in, a meaning tied to immorality. After that, it gets adopted as a secret code in the underworld. And finally, its public reclamation as a banner of pride.
Let's start at the very beginning. The word first came into English from Old French back in the 12th century, and its original meaning was purely positive. It meant things like joyful, merry, and carefree. For hundreds of years, that was its one and only meaning.
What's really interesting here is how that core meaning started to expand over time. It wasn't just about an internal feeling anymore. It began to describe a person's general personality, being lighthearted, and crucially, their external appearance. Gay could mean brightly colored or splendidly dressed. And this connection to aesthetics, to appearance, that's a key piece of the puzzle that's going to become very important later on. So, for over 500 years, the word was entirely positive. But then, in the 17th century, things began to change. That idea of being carefree started to take on a darker, more suspicious connotation.
This slide really shows that shift perfectly. Carefree was subtly reframed to mean uninhibited by moral constraints. As early as 1637, dictionaries were noting this new definition, addicted to social pleasures and dissipations. So the word suddenly had this dual meaning. It could be innocent, or it could be immoral, and it all depended on the context.
Now, the crucial point here is that for the next 2 centuries, this new immoral meaning was tied exclusively to heterosexual promiscuity. It's a real historical irony. A gay man was actually a womanizer. And more commonly, the word was linked to sex work. A gay woman was a euphemism for a prostitute, and a gay house was a term for a brothel.
We can see just how common this understanding was in an 1857 cartoon from Punch magazine. One woman asks her friend, "How long have you been gay?" And from the context of the cartoon, it's perfectly clear that gay is being used as a widely understood code for prostitution.
So how did the word make the jump from describing heterosexual rakes and prostitutes to describing homosexuals? Well, that transition happened in the marginalized spaces of society, the so-called underworld, where groups like prostitutes, criminals, and other outcasts all shared a social world and a language.
A key piece of evidence actually comes from early 20th century American hobo subculture. The term gay cat was used to describe a young man who is apprenticed to an older tramp. And these relationships often involved sexual favors in exchange for protection, which created one of the first really strong links between the word gay and homosexuality within a specific subculture.
So in a society where homosexuality was illegal and considered a sickness, the word's ambiguity made it the perfect tool for a hidden community. It was adopted from the underworld and transformed into a discrete code word that people could use for self-identification. And we can actually see how this code started to pop up in mainstream culture, often as a kind of inside joke. In 1922, you had Gertrude Stein slyly repeating the word gay in a story about a female couple. In 1938, Cary Grant ad-libbed a line in a film while wearing a woman's robe. And then in 1956, Len Bernstein played on the double meaning in his musical Candide. For anyone who was in the know, the meaning was obvious.
This all created this fascinating linguistic divide. On one hand, you had the formal, early activist groups, the homophile movement. They deliberately avoided the word gay. They preferred clinical terms like homosexual because they wanted to sound serious and respectable. But meanwhile, in the actual lived subculture, gay was the authentic word people used among themselves for community and, well, for survival.
And then came 1969. A single year that marks a truly seismic shift in this entire story.
The Stonewall Riots were the spark.
That confrontation transformed the quiet plea for tolerance into a loud, radical demand for liberation. And a political revolution like that, it required a linguistic one to match.
The new activists of the Gay Liberation Front made a very deliberate choice to publicly reclaim the word gay. They completely rejected homosexual because they saw it as a clinical term from the medical establishment that framed them as being sick. Instead, they chose to embrace the authentic word from their own community, a word that felt positive, affirmative, and was a true act of self-definition.
And this reclamation went public in a huge way. At the very first Pride Parade in 1970, the official chant of the marchers was, "Say it loud, gay is proud." The subculture's secret code was now a political banner, being broadcast to the entire world.
This political reclamation was so powerful, so successful, that it just saturated the culture. As the new meaning became completely dominant, the original meaning of happy or merry became almost impossible to use without confusion. And so, it quickly began to fade away from common use.
Which brings us to the word's really complex status today, where it kind of holds three distinct meanings at once. You have the primary, dominant meaning, homosexual. Then there's the original, joyful meaning, which is now considered archaic. You really only see it in historical phrases. But a third, pejorative meaning also emerged, using gay as a generic insult for something stupid or undesirable.
And this just goes to show that the story didn't end with a simple victory. The word's reclamation actually led to a backlash, where that very same term of pride was twisted into a slur, which of course just reflected the societal prejudice that still existed.
When you think about it, the journey of this one word is really a story in miniature of a much larger struggle, a story of shame, secrecy, and ultimately self-definition. It reveals that words really are battlefields for our values. And the ongoing fight over the meaning of gay shows that the struggle for dignity and identity, well, it's never truly over.